are listening to the Up and Under podcast, starting in 3, 2, 1.
Yo, what's up, guys? Welcome to the Up and Under podcast. I'm your host, Hani. Joining with me, as always, it's Zeeshan.
Yo.
Alright, man. So now that the first round of the NBA playoffs is officially over, there are still some questions now with some of the eliminated teams that need to be answered. Especially the biggest question of all is, what's next? So in the next couple of episodes, we're going to be kind of, answering those questions for these teams and really figuring out what are the next steps for some of these teams, because some of these teams are in such interesting predicaments that a first round exit really makes the front office think now, what can they do to improve their roster and improve their chances of not letting this happen again? Yeah, and I think there's two teams in particular that have these more questions than any other team. So in this episode, we're going to be basically answering what's next for the Los Angeles Lakers and the Portland Trailblazers.
And yeah, if you've seen our offseason outlook episodes, it's kind of going to be similar to that. But, since we're talking about teams that are actually successful and don't suck, we're going to be talking about the on-court product as well, and not just glossing over that, because obviously, the teams that we've covered in the past for the offseason outlook, nobody cares about their on-court product because they suck, right? But teams like the Lakers and the Trailblazers and eventually some of the other teams that we're going to get to, we care about their on-court product, and that plays a major factor into what they want to do in terms of their, win-now aspirations. So like Hani said, jumping right into it with the Los Angeles Lakers. So this season, obviously, due to the injuries and, other teams as well, COVID and whatnot, the Los Angeles Lakers finished with a 42-30 record, good for the 7th spot in the Western Conference. Now, obviously, as we remember, they had that play-in tournament game with the Golden State Warriors, so which allowed them to get to that 7th seed. They're also tied in terms of record-wise with the Portland Trailblazers, as we're going to talk about in a bit. But obviously, they did finish with the 7th seed in the West, which led to their second seeded matchup with the Phoenix Suns, where they were eventually kicked out of the playoffs in 6 games.
Pretty convincingly, actually.
Pretty convincingly as well, yeah. The problem for them, again, this season they were the best ranked defense in the league, but as always, the problem with them was their 24th ranked offense. They just sucked on offense, and you saw it even more when they played the good teams. They only stayed in the game because of the fact that their defense was so good that kept them in the game. And then obviously in the fourth quarter, when you have LeBron and AD, you're able to win a lot of those games. Unfortunately, when you don't have LeBron and AD, which, was the case for them for a large stretch of this season, and then even in the playoffs with LeBron being there by himself, and, obviously he's at age 36 right now, not able to carry a team like he once was, then you run into a lot of problems, which is why the LA Lakers got kicked out so, soundly in this first round of the NBA playoffs. I think the first order of business, and we've talked about it a number of times with the LA Lakers this season, they need to fix up their centers. They need to get some capable centers who either A, can shoot and space the floor next to AD and LeBron, or B, who can defend, right? Just like they had JaVale McGee and Dwight Howard last season. Now, those two were not shooters by any stretch, but they were able to play their role on one end of the court and serve as lob threats on the other end. And we saw this was able to get the LA Lakers through to win the championship, despite them not being shooters. So I think for the LA Lakers and Rob Pelinka, you need to be able to target either, the first type of center, which is a shooter and a guy who can space the floor next to LeBron and AD, or another guy who can help cover up some of their, defensive issues on the LA Lakers. As we've seen, the center rotation was a complete mess this season with Marc Gasol, Andre Drummond, and Montrezl Harrell. There was just no chemistry. That each center had a glaring weakness. And then obviously, they had a bunch of limitations in which they weren't able to ideally play great with the other players like LeBron and Anthony Davis. The second order of business for them is their shooting, right? they don't really have many players who are confident shooters that can space the floor for LeBron and Anthony Davis.
That burned them in the playoffs, man.
Yeah,
It was tough to watch, man. At times when you have like Kyle Kuzma, gets an open look from LeBron, bricks the shot. Dennis Schroeder, God, I don't know what he was doing in this playoffs. Breaks the shot, starts the game 1 for 5. The shooting is big, man, for the Lakers, man. And it goes back to your point, what you were saying about the floor spacing for AD and LeBron as a center. You need that. They need that type. They need the floor spacing because, again, LeBron's trying to get to the lane. At least a healthy LeBron. In this playoffs, it was kind of weird to see LeBron settle for jump shots and to pass it out. But, again, when he passes it out, he expects guys to hit shots. And, yeah, this Lakers team went over it.
Speaking of LeBron passing it out, if you've seen the highlights of those games and you watch those games, LeBron was getting quadruple teamed in the paint pretty much.
Yeah.
And the fact that the Phoenix Suns were so willing to give up open shots time and time again speaks volumes as to how bad LA shooting has been throughout the season. They have a bunch of guys who can shoot, ideally. Alex Caruso, KCP, Kyle Kuzma, Wesley Matthews. These are all guys that can ideally shoot, but they're not shooters. KCP and Wesley Matthews kind of, but obviously Wesley Matthews is on the wrong side of his career at this point, and KCP is hit or miss. So they need some capable shooters who can space the floor, especially for LeBron and AD, who are both going to be, having so much attention on them in the paint. They need some actual 3-and-D guys instead of just a bunch of guys who can play defense, but don't really have a skill set on offense or don't really have a callable, skill on offense where they can go to that time and time again on the floor. Where they had a guy like, for example, Danny Green last season who played major minutes for them. Though again, he didn't really shoot great in the playoffs, but you knew what you were getting from him on the offensive end, and he knew what his role was. You look at a guy like Kyle Kuzma, for example, who, if there's one thing I can say about him, his defense definitely improved this season. But my point speaks to this, is that, you're throwing him in there for defense. Okay, he's legitimately 6'9", he can play a little bit of defense if you get the most out of him. But on offense, what's his go-to skill set? Nothing. He doesn't have a go-to skill set.
We thought it was a 3-point shot, but again, this playoff really proved that it really wasn't there.
He's always been a volume shooter, right? And that's not going to cut it when you play with LeBron and Anthony Davis. You don't have 20 shots to get into the rhythm. Same with a guy like Alex Caruso, though I think Alex Caruso is great, and he definitely needs to be back on this team. What's his go-to skill set on the offensive end? He doesn't really have one either, right? And that goes to a bunch of guys on this team. THT, he's a driver, but can't really shoot that well. So they definitely need some shooting to surround Anthony Davis and LeBron James. My next point comes to, as we're talking about Kyle Kuzma and Dennis Schroeder, they need some tertiary scoring, right? We know there's LeBron James, there's Anthony Davis. That's the pecking order. It flips game by game, right? They need somebody who can put the ball in the basket after LeBron and Anthony Davis.
Especially when they're on the bench.
Exactly. And that's where guys like Kyle Kuzma and Dennis Schroeder were brought in or were there. They were there to be those guys for LeBron James and Anthony Davis. Unfortunately, Kyle Kuzma is terrible. Let's call it what it is. He's terrible.
I would say this. He's not a guy who can create his own opportunity. He's a guy that needs somebody to kind of create for him, which, again, we thought he could be that guy that created for his own shot, especially before LeBron got there. That's kind of the flashes he was showing. But as you're seeing now, especially in playoff basketball, that's just not his game. And Dennis Schroeder, he thinks he can do too much. And, decides to, especially at the beginning of a game, tries to drive in for layups, not hitting the backboard, missing shots in the beginning of the game. And again, you can't score 0 points. Both these guys have scored 0 points in multiple playoff games in a 7-game series. It can't happen.
And Dennis Schroeder too. You're talking about a guy who, going back to my earlier point, shooting. He can't shoot either. He's not a shooter. He had that 1 year last year in OKC, which, again, as I said, I've said this before as well. The OKC year was a blip on the radar. It's not Dennis Schroeder. People were hopeful that this was the new Dennis Schroeder. It's not. We know what Dennis Schroeder is. We've seen him for a number of years in Atlanta. And then in OKC last year, he showed what he could become. But that's not him. What he is what he's always been in Atlanta and this year in LA. a guy who can drive, who's fast, who plays hard on the defensive end, but is not really skilled offensively in terms of shooting the ball, at least from behind the three-point line. And he showed that this season, and especially in the playoffs when Phoenix was willing to give those shots to him behind the arc. And unfortunately, because of his shot selection, he ends up taking those shots all the time. So they need some tertiary scoring outside of, Kyle Kuzma and Dennis Schroeder. And obviously I'll talk about Dennis Schroeder again in a bit, to surround guys like Anthony Davis and LeBron James. The next point I'm going to come to is coaching issues. I gave a lot of credit to Frank Vogel last year in the playoffs. I gave him so much credit, but it works. No, I think I gave him an adequate amount of credit because to his credit and to his coaching staff's credit, I thought they game planned very well. I thought they had great schemes. I thought their team executed their schemes and their game plans very well last season. But because of the fact that I gave him a lot of credit last season, I gotta do it both ways. As in, I gotta give him this criticism now. And this whole season, I've watched a number of LA games. As I've said before, LeBron's my favorite player, so I watched a number of LA games. The problem is, we know what Frank Vogel is. He's a great defensive coach. The problem is, once again, he was subpar on the offensive end. Now, again, I'm not going to put complete blame on him. The personnel on the offensive end is not great. But it speaks volumes as to how Frank Vogel is still, a subpar offensive coach, unfortunately. And we saw that this season when he let the Lakers, as I said, the 24th ranked offense. Number one, it was just bad rotations all around. A lot of the times he was subbing in players that he didn't need to, subbing out players that were playing great. And it just did not work well. And as I said, the players that encapsulated this point was the center rotation of Marc Gasol, Andre Drummond, and Montrezl Harrell. We talked about Frank Vogel playing Andre Drummond way too many minutes, not putting him off the bench where he would probably be in his best role, playing off the bench.
I mean, he didn't even play Drummond in game 6. He didn't even play him.
Yeah.
And that was after the criticism that, okay, you should play Marc Gasol more. But that shouldn't mean you bench Andre Drummond. You have these guys, you can play them in splits, it's possible to do that and, get the most out of these guys. But the problem is, Frank Vogel wasn't able to really figure that out for whatever reason. And I'm really I'm going to get to it a little later, but I'm trying to wrap my head around where the notion of these average coaches are, somehow being perceived as these great head coaches just because they won a championship. Like Frank Vogel, decent head coach. He's never been a great coach. Never been a fantastic, never been an out-of-worldly coach. But then he won one ring, but we're comparing him to Phil Jackson all of a sudden. That's the mindset. Even now, with coaching candidates like Jason Kidd and Tyler Lue.
Oh, man.
Where are these notions coming from? These guys are actually good at drawing up X's and O's. Sure, they might be good at commanding a locker room, but there's two elements to coaching. We've talked about it in the past. But yeah, I can't. Frank Vogel really played a big factor in why the Lakers just collapsed.
Again, to your point, not playing Marc Gasol enough or putting him in the right situations. We saw how successful he was in Nick Nurse's offense because of the fact that Nick Nurse played him in the role that he was supposed to be. On the top, running the, high post offense. Unfortunately, obviously, LeBron's there, so it kind of complicates things for Marc Gasol. But, when LeBron's not there, that's what you need him to do. And then a lot of Lakers fans were very pissed off about this. No Montrezl Harrell at all. Now, I understand the rationale behind not playing Montrezl Harrell, but where they were in the Phoenix series, you got to be able to throw out whatever you can. You got to play all your cards, right? And he kept Montrezl Harrell on the bench, unfortunately, even despite the fact that, he has his defensive limitations, but he was able to give you a couple of good minutes and some good energy, which the Lakers very, very dearly needed in this series against Phoenix. So him just messing up the center rotations, I think encapsulated the season that they had. As I said, not a good offensive coach. They relied on LeBron too much. Their offensive sets were not great. There was no spacing. It was not a pretty offense to watch. It was kind of terrible to watch. And even me, being a Raptors fan, watching our terrible offense, our system was still great. So it still made me appreciate Nick Nurse, especially in contrast to a guy like Frank Vogel, when I would watch his system, despite the fact that they had better players than the Toronto Raptors, their system was so much worse. It just made the offense, end look so bad. And that brings me to my final point about, his offense. Not putting guys in the right spots, as I talked about with Marc Gasol, for example. I'm going to talk about Anthony Davis, and I've been wanting to see this more for the last 2 years already. It's already been 2 years. They don't run too many pick and rolls for Anthony Davis, and that makes no sense for me because of the fact that this guy's a legitimate 6'11" dude who can handle the ball, who can shoot from anywhere on the floor, get a shot off against anybody, and also a great lob throw. This guy can do everything for you on the offensive end. Why don't you run more pick and rolls? Especially with a guy like LeBron, who's a top 5, top 10 passer of all time. Why would you not run more pick and rolls? Instead, he wants to put Anthony Davis on the block and run a million post-ups for him, which AD can do. But you've seen, it takes a toll on his body. He's already a very injury-prone guy. Making him play in the post all day, every single day, is not great for his long-term outlook. Well, and plus, it doesn't help him. It's not the most ideal thing you can do with Anthony Davis.
Well, that's something I wanted to actually touch upon. Some of the blame for the Lakers, this postseason has to be on Anthony Davis as well. Because why aren't you healthy? I don't understand injuries happen as part of the sport, but how bad is your body to the point where every year there is something that you get hurt with? Think about it this way. And again, not everyone can be like a LeBron James spending $1.5 million on his body every year. But that's the type of, situation you gotta be in. You gotta keep your body in tip-top shape. You gotta be in shape. You have to, test your body to, bear a full 82-game season and a postseason. And you were brought in because LeBron is aging. He's old. And if, for instance, an injury does happen to LeBron, which happened before this Phoenix series, the ankle injury, which was clearly bothering him. Anyone that says LeBron was not bothered by that injury, you're fooling yourself, because just visually watching him, he was not the same player, especially in the postseason. But with Anthony Davis, he was supposed to be there to, take the load off LeBron and take over these type of games, take over these type of series, but he was hurt. And again, it sucks that he got hurt, but this can't keep being a trend. Other than the Lakers are going to have to look into maybe moving him at some point, because the guy just can't stay healthy. He's arguably one of those talented bigs in the game today, if not the most talented big. But he's always hurt. The same problem with Joel Embiid as well. But the thing with AD is that, AD was brought in for a sole reason, and he's not doing that right now.
To your point, I think I heard this from somebody, I can't remember who it was, but they were talking about this AD LeBron, duo in comparison to guys like, for example, Shaq and Kobe. Shaq was dominant, and then slowly Kobe took over that number 1 role. D-Wade and Shaq. Shaq was dominant. D-Wade slowly took over that number 1 role. You look at Magic and Kareem. Kareem was the dominating factor. Magic slowly took on that role. LeBron's in year 18, man. He's still doing the same thing. That's kind of unacceptable if you're Anthony Davis. You were brought in not only to be LeBron's co-star, but to succeed him as the star for the Los Angeles Lakers. And to this point, LeBron is still the number 1 guy, which, again, that speaks volumes as to how great LeBron is. But if you're Anthony Davis, you've got to be able to take that mantle away from him.
And I know you're going to touch upon it in a second, but you're making $40 million over the next 4 years almost. That you got to do better. You got to be better. And the reality of the situation is, the other thing with Anthony Davis, I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent here. Why can't this guy go in for a layup? Why can't this guy acknowledge that I'm 6'11", probably like 250, 260, can go inside and lay it up whenever I want? No, I'm settling for mid-range jumper. That's what AD's doing. But you know why? Because the psychological. Well, we'll talk about Kristaps in a future video, in a future episode. But with AD, it's the psychological aspect. He's so afraid of getting hurt. And at least that's what I see. He's so afraid of getting hurt that he's avoiding contact. He's avoiding getting inside. People say, oh, Drummond clogged up the lane, but Drummond wasn't playing, and he was still doing the same thing. So it's really in his head that he's very injury prone. He's really has to fix that moving forward.
Yeah, for sure. And then speaking to your point about, him making $40 million a season, That brings me to my final point about the Los Angeles Lakers. And again, it's not really a good thing if you're a Lakers fan. And my point is that they have a bunch of issues with their cap. They have currently 7 players on their books for next season. Montrezl Harrell has a player option, which I think he might decline probably. So that brings you to 6. And then on top of that, you have a non-guaranteed contract with Alfonso McKinney. With pretty much 5 players on your books, you're still at around $106 million, which is around $9 million under the cap. So you only have pretty much a mid-level exception to play with. Now, obviously, you can go over the cap, do all of that. I'm not a cap expert. You can definitely do some stuff.
Mid-level is to just get a decent player.
Exactly.
But you still gotta sign other fill roster spots as well. So
exactly.
Yeah, it's such a tough
Not to mention the fact that they have a couple of players that they clearly do want to bring back. They've talked about them wanting to bring back Andre Drummond. I don't know why. I wouldn't. I kind of understand the rationale behind why they want to. Just if they're able to bring him back on a cheap contract, sure. You bring him back on like a tiny contract, okay, maybe fine. But I really wouldn't want Andre Drummond. But then they have obviously Alex Caruso is one of their key free agents.
He needs to come back.
He needs to come back. Taylor Horton-Tucker, they invested a lot into him. They apparently did not want Kyle Lowry in order to keep Taylor Horton-Tucker. He's about to be a restricted free agent, so his situation is going to be very interesting. And then Dennis Schroeder. Obviously, both parties have said that they want to come back together, but Dennis Schroeder just declined an $80 million contract reportedly in the middle of the season. He's definitely not going to get that money.
He might still link and be like, hey, it's still on the table. But Dennis Schroeder feels like he's worth more than that. You think he's a $100 million player, but he's not.
He's not. He's a bench player. He's a very good bench player, but he's a bench player. And so the Los Angeles Lakers have to make a big decision on what they want to do with Dennis Schroeder. So it's going to be very interesting. As I said, Montrezl Harrell also has a player option. So it's going to be a very interesting offseason for them, given the number of salary cap issues that they have. They also pretty much have no assets. They have, some of their picks. Obviously, their picks aren't very valuable at all because of the fact that they are a winning team. So you're not going to get much for whatever assets you do have left. I'm just going to throw out a couple of names that they could potentially get in free agency. But obviously, as I said, it depends on how much room they have to work with. Otto Porter Jr., Trevor Ariza, Avery Bradley, Kevon Looney, Bismack Biyombo. These were just a couple of players I named off the top of my head. And you see the point that I'm trying to, go to is they need some low maintenance players, cheap players who can fill roles for them and help LeBron and AD out on both sides of the court and solve some of their issues. Now, again, with the fact that they have no assets and, their salary cap, their cap book is not looking too great, I don't know how likely it is for them to be able to find any sort of good quality players to fill out the rest of the rotation. But listen, man, LeBron's not getting any younger. And for me personally, AD is a top 10 player in the league, but he's not that number one guy that can get you to a championship. I've seen him his whole career. I've watched him his whole career. He's not that number one guy for me on a championship team. And if LeBron ages even more moving forward, then I think your championship window has closed. So I think you've got to be able to maximize whatever tiny, small window of opportunity you have right now for a championship. Because who knows when they'll be able to get another one.
Yeah, I think with the Lakers, LeBron isn't getting any younger, as you said, and he's going into year 19 of his career, which is impressive in its own right. But again, now he's had a couple of years of injuries for the first time in his career, which is pretty amazing, actually. The fact that he barely got hurt until now. And again, the injuries at this stage of his career are going to take more of a toll than maybe an injury early on because of the fact that, he's older. His body has taken a lot of mileage on it. But he is still LeBron, and I think knowing how LeBron operates, I think he will come back in the next season healthier with the vengeance, trying to, will his team maybe to win one more ring. I think that's what LeBron's going to try to do. And the Lakers have to be all in and respect that and get LeBron and AD everything they need to get them a championship. I think this roster was poorly constructed by Rob Pelinka. I think they let go of key guys who they should have probably kept, in Dwight Howard, JaVale McGee, Rondo, some guys that they probably should have kept around, like Danny Green even. So the fact of the matter is that this Lakers team, they have an opportunity to improve their roster. It's going to be very tough though, but this is their window.
I will say, to your point about the roster construction, we got to keep our words for this too, because us and most other people before the season started said that this was a great offseason. The additions I think were great, but it just didn't work at all on the court, and I think that was the issue. But I don't fault Rob Pelinka for that, because we all thought the moves were great. I think he thought the moves were great, but on court products a different story altogether.
Well, I think you were a little critical of the Andre Drummond move, but
again, that was later on in the season.
Yeah, but again, we'll see what happens with the Lakers, but they have a lot of questions to answer heading into this offseason. Which brings us into another team with a ton of questions. We're talking about the Portland Trailblazers. Now, the Blazers finished the regular season with a 42-30 record. They held the tiebreaker over the Lakers, so they actually ended up being the 6th seed. They didn't have to play in the play-in. In the regular season, they were, pretty good offensively. They're second best in offensive rating. But the problem with the Blazers is they were the 29th ranked defense. And the funny thing is, this never changed, even in the postseason. Like, they were 4th in points per game, but 13th in opponent points per game. And I know what you're probably thinking. 13, wow, that's pretty good. Out of 16 teams, that's not good. And that's the main reason why the Blazers lost to Denver. Even though Denver was injury plagued, Portland simply, and it's been a problem they've had all year, their lack of defense. Besides a few players like Robert Covington, Yusuf Nurkic, maybe, and Zeeshan told me not even to put him on, but I'm going to
because he doesn't play, man.
Well, I'm just going to put him on anyway because that's all they have is Rondé Holmes-Jefferson.
Derek Jones.
Maybe Derek Jones, but again, similar situation to Rondé. But the problem is, other than these 3, maybe 4 guys, no one else in the Blazers could guard a chair. If the chair was on the court, and that was a major problem. Even though the Blazers had an explosive offense, a great offense with Damian Lillard. He dropped 55 and 10 in a playoff game, and
set the record for threes in
a playoff game. But the problem is, even though they're scoring a lot of points, they're giving up just as many, if not more, on the other end, and that is not a recipe for success. And the Blazers have a lot of options in the offseason because they have a lot of players coming off the books. Like obviously a guy like Yusuf Nurkic, he's already made it pretty clear he's not coming back next year, so he's gone. We have a guy, they have to re-sign Norman Powell. Derek Jones Jr., player option, he might decline that. Other than that, then you have guys like Enes Kanter's a free agent. A bunch of players that are free agents this year for the Portland Trailblazers. So they really have to rethink about their strategy and reload up. And funny thing is, when I bring up, Enes Kanter and these type of players on the Blazers, it really leads to the second issue with this team. Their bench is garbage. Like, they have no depth whatsoever. Like, it's really funny how everyone was praising the Blazers for grabbing a guy like Norman Powell, having Carmelo Anthony and Damian Lillard, etc. But besides their starting 5 or maybe their 6th man, that's it. Like, there's really nobody else on the team that you can reliably put on the floor and expect positive results from. And ideally the Blazers need to get two-way players, or at least players that can defend at a high enough level so that the great offense can at least be productive on the floor, And there are some potential options that they can choose from. Obviously getting a guy like Patty Mills would be great for them, being another floor general for them. Got maybe Kelly Olynyk, Tony Snell, Kelly Oubre Jr. Like, you kind of understand where I'm kind of getting at, where like guys that can kind of, be two-way players or at least give you depth, which is so critical in the playoffs. Ideally they need to give Damian Lillard some sort of help.
And we talked about this in our episode, a couple episodes ago when we were breaking down the playoffs in the first round for the Western Conference. We talked about the fact that Portland had no depth. We said Carmelo Anthony and Enes Kanter were pretty much the only guys coming off the bench. And then Terry Stotts finally realized, hey, I have Anthony Simons halfway into the series. Oh, he might be okay. And, he was pretty solid, honestly, but he's not, at least he's not a guy you can rely on, at least in this stage of his career. So Portland, to your point, pretty much has no depth. And this led to Damian Lillard having to carry so much of a scoring role. And then obviously the rest of the 5 starters, and even a guy like Yusuf Nurkic, for example, who did not play great in the Denver series. But it wasn't entirely his fault because of the fact that he's also carrying such a huge load as probably your best passer on the team, as probably your best defender on the team, trying to play make for Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum in the playoffs, and then trying to stop Nikola Jokic on the other end. And you saw he almost fouled out like every single game, or fouled out every single game down here. And it took a huge toll on Yusuf Nurkic. Why? Because he was overburdened. And that stems from the fact that they have no depth. Enes Kanter was his backup. Enes Kanter is great offensively in terms of scoring the ball at least, but defense, we know he's arguably the worst defender in the league.
I mean, even scoring wise, he doesn't really space the floor either. So it's not like he really provides them with such a important piece on the offensive side of the ball. But again, the bench has just been such a big problem for them, and that's requiring Dame to carry such a huge load. And speaking of, the reason, you wonder why Dame is carrying such a huge load. When he had the running mate in CJ McCollum, he had the guy, they acquired a guy in Norman Powell who was supposed to be really solid. Carmelo Anthony is there. But the problem is, these guys didn't really show up. Maybe Carmelo Anthony, that was pretty much Norman Powell for a game. Norman Powell for a game. But I think it might be time for the Blazers to consider trading CJ McCollum. Now, the problem is, CJ McCollum makes almost $32 million on average over the next 3 seasons. And, he hasn't been that reliable in the playoffs. I know his numbers might look good, 20 points per game, etc. But you know what? He reminds me of a guy like Chris Middleton, to be honest with you. There are certain players that can be number 1, number 2 guy, but there's just certain players that just can't, or more suited to be a number 3 or maybe a number 4 guy on the team. And I think that's kind of what CJ McCollum is. There were just mistakes that he made on the floor, like stepping out of bounds in overtime, or turning the ball over, or fouling at the wrong time. Missing shots. That you cannot expect Damian Lillard to overcome these level of mistakes, especially with number 2 guy. So it might be a good idea to look into what a possible trade would be like for them. Maybe get Dame a better star player. Problem is, A, the Blazers don't really have any assets to make a trade, and B, McCollum's contract is huge, and the fact of the matter is he's 29 years old. So he's not a young player, but he's making max level money for not really max level production. So, from the Blazers, from the Blazers' perspective, they'd be open to trading him because again, they have a guy in Norman Powell who they can re-sign for cheaper, slot him at the 2, maybe get a 3, or maybe get a better 4 for CJ. Problem is, not many players that you can get that's an upgrade. The only player that I can think of that's a potential upgrade that maybe, just maybe, would work is Bradley Beal. Bradley Beal is probably the only guy I can see you pair with Damian Lillard. It could be something special. Again, it comes back to, will the Wizards want CJ McCollum? You might have to give up another asset or 2 to make a trade like that happen.
That's not happening.
Or get a third team involved. Again, the Wizards need to be incentivized to make that type of move. And the fact of the matter is, CJ signed just as long as Beal is. He makes just as much money, and he's not as good. So that's the only player, or someone of that caliber that, to be honest with you, I was looking, I couldn't find anybody really that would be willing to make a deal. The only alternative to maybe, replacing CJ McCollum is if you trade him or you salary dump him to a team and maybe take a flyer and sign a guy that maybe like a DeMar DeRozan, or take a chance on the Victor Oladipo given his health situation, and maybe see if that works, pairing that with extra depth, But again, I really think it's time to move on from CJ McCollum. Or maybe get somebody in to be a true number 2 for Damian Lillard, because he's carrying too much of a load.
Again, this has been an issue for the Portland Trailblazers, and a lot of fans, especially CJ McCollum fans, have kind of said that CJ isn't the problem for the Portland Trailblazers. And to a degree, they're right. He's not the biggest problem for the Portland Trailblazers. The problem is, exactly. It's not the solution. And if you want to be that next level, if you want to get to that next level in the playoffs, you need to have a solution. And CJ McCollum, unfortunately, is a very good player, but he's not that solution. When we're talking about the backcourt of Damian Lillard and CJ McCollum, what's, the thing that one guy can do but the other guy, or one guy can do but the other guy can do, right? How does this backcourt help each other? The truth of the matter is this backcourt doesn't really help each other out. CJ McCollum can score the ball. He can't defend. Same thing with Damian Lillard. Except CJ McCollum's a worse version of that because he can't go for 50 like Damian Lillard can. CJ McCollum's undersized for the shooting guard position. Not a great playmaker. He just doesn't fill the holes that you need from a backcourt partner of Damian Lillard. And that's why, this unfortunately just hasn't worked out. Talk about Norman Powell. This was a thing I said when they made the deal. I still thought it was a good deal, but this was the one issue I had with the Portland Trailblazers, knowing their scheme and knowing their personnel, especially with two ball-dominant guys in CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard there. Norman Powell, and I was proven right by this, he would be reduced to a spot-up shooter, which is not his game. He's a guy that needs the ball in his hands to slash, to attack the paint, and then shoot off of those opportunities that he gets from other guys. They essentially reduced Norman Powell to a spot-up shooter role, and that's why you saw his effectiveness minimized so much. That's not really his role, and he's not a good defender on the other side of the ball. So either way, we're not getting the maximum value and maximum production you could have gone from Norman Powell, or the production that you wanted from Norman Powell when you traded for him. And that again speaks to the personnel issue of the pairing of CJ McCollum and Damian Lillard, which is why I agree with your point, and have said this for years on end already, that I think they need to be able to, they need to find a way to get rid of CJ McCollum and bring back something that works better for the team. Doesn't necessarily have to be a player that's just as good as CJ McCollum, but something that works better for the team.
Yeah, they can even trade CJ for depth even, but the point that we're trying to make is that it's time for them to break up their backcourt. Similar to what the Raptors did in the offseason of 2018, where they broke up Lowry and DeRozan. The Raptors traded DeRozan. Now they happen to have gotten Kawhi Leonard and where they worked out, but the Blazers got to do something similar to that. There's something in that sort of realm that you can't keep doing the same thing over and over again and expect a different result. Speaking of things that they do need to also go out and find, they need to find a new starting center. So Yusuf Nurkic is most likely not coming back. And again, Nurkic provided them with that, being their defensive anchor, being able to provide them with some offense. And the Blazers obviously need someone to replace that. I think ideally a guy in Serge Ibaka would be great for them. I think he would work out very well in terms of being a floor spacer, a defensive guy, good locker room presence. And I think you can get him relatively on a cheaper deal since he barely played this year. Another option, an option that
he is on one more year though.
Well, if he opts out.
Yeah.
So if he opts out, then you can go after a guy like Serge Ibaka. But another player who I think is more interesting, but it will be tough to make a deal work, is Miles Turner. And you can only get Miles Turner via a trade, but this is a move where you can potentially move a CJ McCollum, and Indiana needs the scorer, needs the guy to give him some level of offense besides DeMontis Sabonis. Maybe bring a guy like CJ McCollum in to pair, which it works better off because now you have a big, you have a guard, you have decent role players. And again, Portland can get back Miles Turner, maybe even a guy like, what's his name? I'm forgetting his name, Jeremy Lamb. Maybe get a guy like that back, in the deal. And, it could work. The trade in theory could work, but now will the Pacers want to go after a guy like CJ McCollum and give up a guy like Miles Turner? We really know. But Miles Turner would really solve the Blazers' center issues. And finally, the last issue that the Blazers need to solve this offseason, they need a new coach. Now, obviously, they parted ways they basically fired Terry Stotts, which we basically talked about a few episodes ago, where if Terry Stotts wasn't able to take the Blazers to a deep playoff run, he was pretty much gone. And now we see that was true. So the Blazers need a new coach. And although Terry Stotts I thought was a pretty good coach in terms of, getting the Blazers to the playoffs, and year after year after year, the fact of the matter is that they need somebody better than him. And the best example I give, they need like a Nick Nurse type of coach. Or a Steve Kerr, an innovative mind, somebody who could utilize all the pieces on the team in the best way possible. And again, I know that it's so super hard to find, but the Blazers have to make that a point of emphasis because you have a generational player in Damian Lillard and you don't want to waste it. Some of the names that have been floating out there, obviously been Jeff Van Gundy because he's been running for pretty much every coaching vacancy for the last 7-8 years now.
Last decade.
Maybe the last decade and a half. Honestly, to be honest, I don't know if Jeff Van Gundy can still coach. To be honest, I don't really know. Mike D'Antoni is another one, but I don't think that's a great idea considering. Again, he's the reason why they call him Mike D'Antoni because there's no D. He's not existent because Mike D'Antoni doesn't coach defense. Another option is Chauncey Billups, who Damian Lillard has vouched for. Again, I don't know how good Chauncey is as a coach because he's been on the Ty Lue staff with the Clippers, but he could be an interesting option to take a flyer on. Another name who I've been actually really surprised about and actually really want to see a coach in the NBA, Juwan Howard. Juwan Howard has right been coaching Michigan, the college team. And man, if he makes the jump to the NBA, not only will he be instantly respected by every player, but he's pretty darn good. He knows how to coach, which is, it's pretty good for him. So the Blazers definitely need a new coach, somebody who can really get them through the playoffs and really, utilize all the guys, in one shot.
Well, yeah, I think, for example, a guy like Mike D'Antoni, to your point, like Mike D'Antoni, there's no defense, but the Blazers' MO has never been defense, not really.
But they gotta change that.
They gotta change that, but again, if they can't change it, then a guy like Mike D'Antoni, who can at least help you unlock your offense even further, could be an interesting name. But yeah, like other guys.
How much further than second can you get? That's my question. Like they're already.
I feel like they could definitely be better. From what I've seen, the isolations, the lack of, I think, sets that Terry Stotts ran. I definitely feel like there's room to improve for the Trailblazers, but again, to your point, that was never their issue. Their issue has always been defense and, secondary or tertiary scoring next to Damian Lillard.
Yeah, but again, they definitely need to find a new head coach. Thank God it's not Jason Kidd. First of all, Damian Lillard wanted you and you said no. Disrespectful in my opinion. Second of all, he's not even that great of a coach. Honestly, if the Blazers even hired him, I would have been disappointed. They would have been like, really, that's the best you can do?
Again, to your point about Ty Lue and Jason Kidd, like you said, I don't know where they got these reputations for being great head coaches.
Remember, Giannis got better after Jason Kidd. And everyone saying, Jason Kidd unlocked them.
Tyronn Lue got to NBA Finals multiple times with LeBron James. He had LeBron James. If you look at how he coached those series, it was terrible, man. There was so many laughable moments that even as a fan, you could see, bro, what is this guy doing, man? Their locker room presences, right? They're good locker room presences. Even that Jason Kidd, I don't know. Maybe stir the corner. But again, Jason Kidd, Ty Lue are locker room presences. But that doesn't necessarily translate to X's and O's results. And you need to be good at doing both, both aspects of the job if you want to get your team to, for example, a championship status. With guys like Nick Nurse, for example, Greg Popovich, Steve Kerr, those guys are good at the X's and O's and good at the locker room stuff. You need to be able to do that if you want to be a great coach. And Jason Kidd, Ty Lue, those types of guys are not good at the X's and O's. And I don't understand this notion that they're good coaches. I don't understand where that came from.
I don't understand it either. But we'll see what happens. We'll see what the Blazers do. Obviously, these were our opinions of what the Lakers and the Blazers should do next. Let us know what you guys think. What do you guys think the Blazers and the Lakers should do next to improve their team and improve their chances next season? Which brings us into the up and under segment for this week. First off, starting off with some somber news. Obviously, first off, we're going to talk about the Utah Jazz legend Mark Eaton unfortunately passed away. Obviously, I'll let Zeeshan take away. He's the historian among us, but big part of the Utah organization.
Yeah, man, it's kind of sad too because unfortunately for some reason this hasn't been talked about, and nobody really talked about Mark Eaton passing away, which was
Utah players definitely did.
Utah as a organization definitely did, but I feel like for some reason he didn't get the adequate respect he deserved across the league, which is why I want to bring him up at least. When Mark Eaton obviously, was a great defensive player and whatnot, but if you talk to anybody who knew him, they would say he was one of the best people you ever met. Obviously, I don't know him personally, so I can't speak.
Rudy Gobert definitely talked about it a little bit,
Yeah.
especially
Definitely.
on the connection he made with him.
And one of the biggest players in NBA history, But yeah, man, it's pretty sad too because of the fact that it was a biking accident. And, we've seen a number of biking accidents, like terrible biking accidents in the Utah area recently. Sean Bradley is another name who unfortunately is being paralyzed due to a biking accident. But yeah, man, it's pretty messed up. Obviously, thoughts burst his family. But, yeah, man, like rest in peace to Mark Eaton. He's definitely a legend of the game for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Next up, are you up or under on the Nuggets' Nikola Jokic actually winning the MVP? And this was recently announced. Are you up or under on it?
Dude, I'm hella up on this. Remember, we told y'all that this was gonna happen. Like as of right now, we're 3 or 4 in NBA award. We'll talk about the next one. Obviously, because funny. We saw it coming too. We did see it coming. But we talked about what Jokic has been doing this season. That's just been unheard of from the big man position. Like the guy averaged almost 30 points per game, grabbed almost 11 rebounds, and was still dishing out 8 assists per game. Like that's unheard of. He was the best player from start to finish this season. He played every single game. You saw what he did in the postseason. Steph Curry was great this year. Joel Embiid was great this year too. But I think Jokic just had a much better overall year than both those guys. And I think that's why he definitely deserves the award.
And not to mention the fact that he had to carry the team a lot of times.
Yeah, he did.
He finished with the Denver Nuggets, despite the injuries and the struggles that they had. They only finished with 4 less wins than the Philadelphia 76ers, which is insane. And that speaks volumes as to how great Nikola Jokic is as a player for him to be able to carry this Denver Nuggets team to the degree of success that they have. Nikola Jokic, definitely deserves to win the MVP award.
See, I don't think Nikola Jokic gets enough respect. I think because of his style and unorthodox, but I think definitely after this award, people have now acknowledged it, how good he actually is.
Yeah.
Next up, are you up or under on New York Knicks head coach Tom Thibodeau wins the NBA Coach of the Year award?
Okay, so I'm under on it. Listen, I'm not saying I'm under on it because of the fact that he doesn't deserve it. He definitely does deserve it, which is why we said, that he was in our list. We did give the award to Quinn Snyder, which I think either him or Monty Williams still deserve this award over Tom Thibodeau. But as we said in our episode when we predicted the awards, I think I'm pretty sure I said it that despite the fact that we gave our award to Quinn Snyder, I said that I am pretty sure that Tom Thibodeau will win it because of the fact that, first of all, he got his team 20 more wins than the previous season. And then second of all, it's New York. It's the Knicks. It's big market.
Listen, I don't give a damn about any of that. The fact of the matter is, first off, I can get it all out of it. Thank you, Atlanta Hawks, for proving my whole point. The New York Knicks were okay. They were great. This is the first year they were above average, and the Knicks thought they were going to win a championship. I'm glad they got humbled as a fan.
Knicks fans chanting when we want Brooklyn,
bro. I can't wait. You wouldn't even want Brooklyn, honestly. The way they're playing the Bucks, you wouldn't even want them. But it's funny how the Knicks really I'm waiting for Tom Thibodeau to eventually have to miss the playoffs next year. I'm really waiting for it to happen for the fan base to be humbled. I still think Tom Thibodeau is a flawed head coach in terms of, again, the Knicks were so bad on offense. You saw it in the playoffs, and Trae Young tore them apart, even despite having the 4th best defense in the league. Trae Young tore them apart. I don't even like Trae Young that much, but he played well. And the reality is, I think Quinn Snyder and Monty Williams did a much better job with their teams, getting the most out of their players, higher seeds in more difficult conferences. I definitely think those two guys deserve it over Tom Thibodeau, but again, it's the New York factor, it's the media factor, which I kind of disagree with.
Yeah, man.
Ruin our predictions. We were
again.
so well.
It's not that he doesn't deserve it, but I still want to give it to him.
Other guys deserve it more.
Yeah. Next up, are you up or under on Mavericks legend Dirk Nowitzki saying that Luka Doncic is already surpassing as the Mavericks GOAT?
I'm under it because not yet. Luka's got to win a title. Title, maybe an MVP to definitively surpass him. I think talent-wise, I think he has more talent than Dirk has. But in terms of accomplishments, Dirk has accomplished far more than Luka has. I think Luka would admit that himself. The Mavs won a title with Dirk. Dirk won an MVP. Luka still has some ways to go, but again, he's only 22 years old, so I think he has enough time to surpass him.
I mean, again, like Dirk played how many seasons? Like what, 19 or something? 20. And Luka Doncic is on his third season, fourth season, whatever it is. So give him time. I think he'll get there. Yeah. But as of right now, obviously not yet.
Not yet. Speaking of the Mavericks, are you up or under on Kristaps Porzingis, aka Andrea Bargnani 2.0 according to Zeeshan, reportedly does not feel like Luka Doncic's co-star and feels more like an afterthought on the offense.
Hey, I will say, shout out to whoever came up with the Andrea Bargnani 2.0 meme. That was not me. I won't take credit for that.
No, you can't unsee that.
Yeah, you can't, bro. You can't. I saw that once and I was like, oh my god, bro, like epiphany. But listen, I'm up and I'm also under. In the sense that I'm under because Kristaps Porzingis, you sucked. Plain and simple. Like, you were not good, right? You were not good. Everyone knows that. You do not deserve to be paid $1 billion or whatever you're getting paid right now. Being treated as that second star. You completely finessed the Dallas Mavericks because they thought they were getting a secondary all-star pretty much to pair with Luka Doncic. And you were not that.
$30 million.
Again, I won't give full blame to Kristaps Porzingis. Injuries have taken a toll. He is 7'3". We know how injuries are, especially lower body injuries with big men. So again, I'm not gonna kill him, completely for it. But the point of the matter is, you still suck. Andrea Bargnani 2.0, you were kind of looking like it for a lot of time. But I will say I'm up on it in the sense that, and we were talking about this before, me and Hani. I don't think I may be of the opinion now, and this opinion has been forming for a while. I don't think Rick Carlisle is a very good coach. And this is one of the reasons why Kristaps Porzingis in Rick Carlisle's offensive system has not been utilized correctly at all. There was that famous quote that Rick Carlisle had was it last year or a couple years ago? I can't remember. Where he said, somebody asked him, why don't you post up Kristaps Porzingis? Because of the fact that he was so successful at it in Europe. And he said, the post-up is not a good thing in today's NBA. And that's clearly false. That is completely false. I don't understand where that notion came from. That's completely false. And I think I'm going to say that I no longer qualify Rick Carlisle as a top coach in my books. And I think that 2011 championship, first of all, credit to Dirk Nowitzki and the rest of the players. But I think Dwayne Casey, I'm giving Dwayne Casey a lot more credit for that now. I already gave him a bunch of credit, but I think Dwayne Casey deserves even more of that credit now. I don't think Rick Carlisle is a great coach. And this is one of the reasons why, Kristaps Porzingis has been relegated to a spot-up shooter in the offense, which, again, despite his struggles, that's not what you want to do with a 7'3" guy that can dribble the ball, that can shoot from anywhere, that can get into the post, catch lobs. This guy is very, very talented, and you've reduced him to a spot-up shooter. Especially what's even worse is the fact that Luka Doncic needs secondary scoring with him, and you've relegated his best secondary scorer to a guy that can only get the ball and shoot the ball. So Luka Doncic has to have even more work on his plate. So, again, Kristaps Porzingis was not good at all, but I don't fault him for feeling some type of weight in Rick Carlisle's system either.
Well, listen, about Rick Carlisle, I still think he's a pretty good head coach. He's better than Ty Lue and these other coaches.
Oh, no, I don't disagree.
So I think in terms of that, he's still he might not be in the upper tier, but he's definitely in the second tier at least in my books at least. But Porzingis didn't play well. He did not play well. You're 7'3", and you're settling on taking 21 jump shots. That's literally what Andrea Bargnani did. And it's and plus again you're negative defensively, which even though you are more, you can move better than Bargnani ever did. And I think if he stepped up more, the Mavs might have actually been able to close the series out to 6. The problem is he didn't do it. Now you can blame Rick Carlisle for not putting him in the best positions to succeed. Fine. But you gotta also blame the player as well. The reality is, when it came down to it, Rick Carlisle trusted Boban over Kristaps Porzingis because Boban was playing his role. Get the ball, dunk the ball. Nobody can stop it. Boban's a legend, by the way. Again, best playoff performer ever.
Boban's a goat. I will say for Kristaps Porzingis on the defensive end, number one, I thought he actually played pretty well in the Clipper series on defense. Not to the capabilities that he's shown before, but he did, I think, play pretty solid. But in terms of his defense, I won't really fault Kristaps Porzingis that much because it's not really his fault for his defense anymore, right? The injuries have taken a toll on him. He was a great defender in New York. The offense is his fault. A lot of it, at least, is his fault. But defensively, I won't really blame the guy for his defensive issues because of the injuries. Next up, are you up or under on the Magic and Steve Clifford parting ways?
Yeah, I'm up on it. We called it. We said it was going to happen. I think this is one of our coaches in our coaches hit list that actually.
No, it wasn't. It wasn't one of the coaches on the list.
Was he an honorable mention?
But we did say that he was probably going to get canned.
Yeah, I think we said he was an honorable mention, but
I think the coaches hit list was guys that we didn't like at all. But we do like Steve Clifford. It's just that wasn't great.
We think he's a solid coach, and I think if he comes on to a winning team as more of a defensive coordinator type of role, I think he'll be fantastic in that role. But in terms of him being a head coach, especially with the Magic, they're just going in two different directions now that it doesn't make sense to keep him around. I think the Magic are trying to do what the Thunder did, get like a younger coach and who can develop younger players and rebuild that way. So I'm not surprised that it happened, to be honest with you.
Yeah, exactly. It was bound to happen.
Plus, for Steve Clifford as well, you kind of want to get out of that situation.
Pretty much.
But moving on, finally to end off this episode, are you up or under on former Boston Celtics president Danny Ainge retires and Brad Stevens is apparently going to be moving up into his role?
Honestly, I don't know. I mean, I guess I'm up on it because of the fact that Danny Ainge is kind of clearly time for him to move on.
Danny Ainge gave up.
He kind of did, but also again, the heart issues that he had kind of makes sense. He is older, but I think first of all, I don't know how to process this. I don't think anybody knows how to process this because it came out of nowhere. When it happened, everyone was just like, what just happened? Right? Nobody knows how to process it. First of all, we don't know how Brad Stevens is going to do this new role. We don't know if it was a good thing for him to move out of a head coaching role. We don't know if anybody will come in through the door for a head coaching job that will be better than Brad Stevens. So it was a very weird situation all around. And it kind of encapsulates the season that the Boston Celtics have had. It's been a very weird, disappointing, and up and down season.
I think, what you were saying, Danny Ainge retiring, although, again, I'm joking that Danny Ainge gave up, which he definitely did.
He kind of did.
He definitely did. The Raptors won more championships in the last decade than you did. But you know what? What you're saying? Just saying. But you had a championship with Kawhi and AD, and you didn't. But, just saying. So
and the players they did trade for, it completely failed.
Your best move was getting Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown. Those were your best moves. But in terms of him retiring, I'm not surprised. But Brad Stevens leaving coaching to take over that role. First off, people were pissed because they were like, there's a lot more experienced candidates who could have taken on that role, which I definitely agree with. And not to say Brad Stevens can't do this role. I think he's a very smart guy, and I think he can definitely do it. But in terms of you moving from a coach all the way up to an executive level, president of basketball operations, dude, that's a huge jump. Which means ownership must really love Brad Stevens. But it comes back to your point. Who is Brad Stevens going to get to replace Brad Stevens? Who's going to be better than him, or at least just as good as he was in terms of the X and the O? We're talking about the Blazers not only having a ton of coaching candidates. Who do the Celtics have? The Celtics are looking at Jason Kidd. Don't hire Jason Kidd, please. Actually, you know what? As a Raptors fan, hire Jason Kidd.
Please do.
I would love it.
Thank you.
But in terms of a basketball sense, or from a practical sense, like there's not really a ton of great candidates unless Brad Stevens knows something that we all don't know, which he probably does. Finding a replacement is going to be next to impossible, I think.
About Brad Stevens, too, reportedly the reason why he went to get out of the head coaching role, again, kind of understandable, is because apparently he was kind of just worn out by it at that point. Which I do understand, huge expectations when it comes to the Boston Celtics, obviously. And, these last couple of years have taken a toll on him. But I will say Brad Stevens as well, that Butler experience, that college experience. In college, as a coach, you're also a recruiter, right? So you kind of have a little bit of general managing experience, right? Some sort of executive level experience, which I think could help him in this regard.
The NBA is a little different.
It's definitely different.
Deal with agents, develop relationships with other GMs, and really work it that way. But maybe in terms of the coach,
well, Brad Stevens doesn't have anybody that doesn't like him, at least. So
not that we know of, at least. But I think in terms of who's going to get to replace him. I think most likely he'll get a college guy that none of us have heard of, but he probably is like, this guy can coach. That's my gut feeling on it, but yeah, dude, this is crazy, man. The turmoil of Boston begins, and I love it. But yeah, man, with that concludes the week's episode. We hope you guys enjoyed it. Subscribe to the show on all the various platforms. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, YouTube, basically wherever you can find a podcast, you can find us with the Uploaded Podcast. Also, follow us on social media, Twitter and Instagram at Uploaded_Podcast, Facebook.com/Uploaded_Podcast for all the latest updates. Whenever we post a new episode or a reaction to news as they occur. Also, check out our website, UploadedPodcast.com. It's our central hub for the show. It's a place where you don't have time to listen or watch the full episode. You can read about it on our website. We post blog posts with every single episode. So definitely check that out if you haven't done so. So stay tuned for next episode. We're going to be doing another What's Next For type of episode for another couple of teams. So definitely stay tuned for that. And then also the content will be coming soon as well. With that concludes this week's episode. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take it easy.
Easy.